to everyone who's joined the webinar this morning. My name is Lynne Somerville. I'm a Business Relationship Manager at Heriot-Watt University on the Graduate Apprenticeship programme. So I'm very excited to be hosting this event today. The topic of how employers can tackle the gender imbalance in the workplace is not only current, but it's an issue that we know many employers struggle with. So we have a team of industry professionals who are well versed on this very subject and aim to frame the current gender landscape, but most importantly, equip those watching and listening with a strategy in terms of how you can begin to tackle this matter within your own organisation. So to begin today's webinar, we have three speakers who are delivering a 10-minute presentation each. The speakers include Lesley Laird, Director of EQUATE Scotland, Marguerite Adam, a Quality Officer at Skills Development Scotland, and Sara Dodd, who recently joined Heriot-Watt as a digital strategist, having served as a director of CodeClan as only one of our many accolades. In follow-up to the presentation, we will be opening up the webinar to questions from you, the audience, where we will speak to Sam Renas, who is Co and Head of Data at EQUATE. Sam is also part of the leadership team at Girl Geek Scotland, and if you didn't think that was keeping her busy enough, she's also an organiser at Pi Data. Alongside, I should add for good measure that she's a Heriot-Watt alumni, having studied software engineering. Last but certainly not least, on our panel today, we have Emily Mason, who is a final year chemical engineering honours degree student at Heriot-Watt. But most notably, she is the founder and president of Watt Women in STEM, alongside being an EQUATE student champion. So without further ado, I'm just going to share my screen and I'm going to introduce Lesley from EQUATE Scotland, Director of EQUATE Scotland, and she will Can everyone see that?
Yes, we can.
Yep.
Yes. Okay. If you just want to tell me when you want the slides moved on, Lesley. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, first of all, for welcoming me along to the Heriot-Watt University Scottish Apprenticeship Week event, tackling the workforce gender gap. As some of you may be familiar with our work, EQUATE Scotland is one of the leading gender equality, diversity, inclusion organisations. Can you move the slide, Lynne? Yeah, next one. There we go. That's it. So we're primarily focused on women, students and employers in STEM, and we're very much a delivery focused organisation. And by that, we deliver free training, delivery workshops and skills and support for both women, students and employers in STEM. We also work to try to influence and input to policy shaping with government, and we also collaborate with other women's organisations to provide a consistent voice. Next slide, please. I'm going to focus this morning on three key talking points. First of all, taking stock in terms of COVID-19, EU recovery, emerging strategies and our recovery. I'm posing the question today around levelling the playing field or just a better pitch for those already on the park. And also the question of leaping forward or rolling back. Next slide, please. If we quickly take stock of just where we are, I think we would all recognise that the full scale of the impact of the current COVID-19 pandemic is currently being masked in employment terms through the furlough scheme. But particularly hard hit, we would recognise are sectors such as retail and hospitality. What we'd all, I think, now come to have an increased awareness is that long-standing labour market segregation issues have been exposed, including pay, pension and welfare benefits. We've seen a plethora of studies reflecting on how women have been impacted in terms of economic opportunity, most likely to have been furloughed and most likely to have had their income reduced during that time. They've also more likely to have increased burden of care and homeschooling. And women are also more likely to have been key workers, both in health care and social care sector. The two final points I'd like to touch on are perhaps not yet fully manifest themselves, but that is the ripple effect in terms of the impact on levels of child poverty. Child poverty is currently 1 in 4, and we know that, according to the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, that this is likely to increase through into 22-23 to around 29-30%. We also know that 1.3 million EU migrants have left the UK since March last year. And I mention that because if you look at many of the recovery plans, and in particular for construction, this is a huge impact because 9% of EU migrants were employed in the construction sector, 30% of that in London. Next slide, please. If we now reflect on post-COVID-19 and recovery, and I pose the question of levelling the playing field, we hear a lot of discussion about building back better, but I think the key question for me is, are we building back fairer? So this week we've seen the announcement that the furlough scheme has been extended for 6 months. We also now see that various economic recovery plans are in play. Economic Advisory Group, etc. I've listed those there. There's investment in apprenticeships and the Youth Guarantee Scheme. In terms of the economic recovery plans, Engender and also Close the Gap have raised real concerns about whether the Economic Advisory Group's plan is gendered. And from my own experience of having reviewed construction and manufacturing and the climate change strategy, I would share those concerns and say that really we've got a lot of work to do if we are really to build back fairer. So 2 questions I pose in this section are, will these plans by themselves change the long-standing inequality and labour market segregation? And will they ensure that women are retrained and reskilled in these sectors of investment and change? Next slide, please. So the question now is, are we going to leap forward or roll back? And I'm just putting this up just to prompt some thinking around, if you only ever fish in the same pond, then unfortunately you only ever catch the same fish. So let me focus down a little on looking at this and how this applies to women in STEM. Next slide, please. This is a summary of women in STEM taken from the most up-to-date UCAS data. And what you'll really see is a pretty flat line in relation to women's participation in STEM through various STEM courses. Next slide, please. If we look a little bit further in terms of subject breakdown, and in particular for female graduates, then while we can see that physical sciences and maths, there's a reasonable representation between about 39 and 43%. If we look at the emerging areas around engineering, tech and computer science, it's pretty much unchanged at around 16% over the period from 2015 through to 2019. Next slide, please. If we also refer then back to the slide when I talked about these emerging strategies and we consider what that means in terms of apprenticeships, the STEM Foundation Apprenticeship by gender, while showing some improvement from 2016, remains pretty disappointing still at only 20.6%. And clearly there is significant work to do in terms of the pipeline through education and training that we need to aspire to if we are indeed to build back fairer. Next slide, please. So I'm starting with, beginning with the end in mind, and some of you may be familiar with this, but let me put this in the context of what I mean by that. Firstly, we know that technology and climate change are going to be key economic drivers going forward. Estimates say that the UK is capable of creating around 700,000 jobs by 2030 in these green and digital emerging economies, and a further 500,000 by 2050. Secondly, we know that there is already a significant skills shortfall in these sectors. Just recently, Computer Weekly highlighted that more than 60% of businesses in the UK are claiming that they have not enough tech talent for delivering their digital strategies. Thirdly, just 25% of the STEM workforce is women. 22% are in AI professions, and just 12% are in the machine learning, according to a recent LinkedIn study. Also, in a study by McKinsey, they highlight it's vital that women participate in the creation of the technology, because their contribution can help tackle concerns about inbuilt gender bias. And this is particularly true, I think, in relation to AI, where we see issues already around recruitment, facial recognition, and health and safety concerns. Set against these emerging trends, I believe it's actually time to set some hard targets through our economic and recovery strategies to tackle these long-standing, systematic and cultural issues in relation to equality, diversity and inclusion. What gets measured gets managed, and what's clear is that we haven't either measured or managed in the past. The pace of change now means that both government and organisations need to step up and focus and to tackle some of these very long-standing and historic issues. Next slide, please. I believe it's time to chart new waters, and I'd like to leave you today with just 5 things that I think could be done right now. Number 1, I believe that all the current economic strategies and recovery plans should be assessed through a lens of equality and impact assessment. I think we should need to go further in that we should automatically include an intersectionality cut of that data, not just in terms of the strategy itself, but who are the beneficiaries of that investment. And more importantly, I believe more than ever, is what is the return of that investment for wider society and what practical policy solutions will be required to deliver it. Secondly, I believe there needs to be a strategic approach to workforce planning. If we are ensuring that women are not going to be overtly impacted by the changes that we're going to see, which I've outlined earlier, then we need to make sure that women impacted by these changes now are given clear pathways and opportunities in terms of retraining, reskilling and education so that they can take up the opportunities in the new and emerging strategies and technologies. Thirdly, I believe we need to address the STEM's imbalance. STEM's key skills are going to be so important, not only to our recovery, but our wider well-being. From sustainability, it's essential that we unlock the current inequality barriers. We also need to therefore ensure that our education systems from early years all the way through to higher and further education are indeed able to meet those challenges and to ensure that there is a better balance and uptake in terms of how we engage women in those science subjects. Fourthly, I think we need to leverage all of the power of the public purse at national and local government level to build back fairer, not just better. For example, I think we can set targets around fair work. We already have the frameworks, but they lack some real teeth in terms of having hard targets and hard measures. And I think that should be reflected in the current recovery plans, the skills programmes, including apprenticeships, because what gets measured does get managed. And finally, I think we need to invest in care for our people and care for our wider society. COVID-19 has bust many myths around home working, but that is not the same as saying that we now have a flexible working or an effective working practice. These practices can only operate if there is appropriate funding in terms of our wider systems of care. The fragility of our care sector has undoubtedly been exposed and severely strained through COVID-19. But I would just highlight a recent point by the Women's Budget Group that a 2% investment in the care sector would return a better return on investment than a 2% investment in the construction sector. So my question for all of us today is what is going to be our contribution and focus on building back better and building back fairer. And I'll just leave you with my final slide today, which is just a little reminder about our student festival that kicks off next week. And one of our star keynote speakers is Sara Murray from Nassau. Thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thanks, Lesley. That was really good. Can I just remind everyone that you can submit questions via the comment section? So I'm pleased to welcome Marguerite Adam from Skills Development Scotland. She's a quality officer, I should add, at Skills Development Scotland. Thanks, Marguerite.
Okay, thank you very much for having me. My name is Marguerite Adam and I'm from Skills Development Scotland. I am an equality executive but focusing on Scottish apprenticeships. So my remit is around improving equality and diversity within Scottish apprenticeships, and part of that focus is attracting and supporting women in STEM. Next slide. So today I want to talk to you a little bit about positive action. So Section 159 of the Equality Act 2010 permits the proportionate positive action in recruitment and promotion. This is where the employer reasonably thinks persons who share a protected characteristic suffer a disadvantage connected to the characteristic, or participation in an activity by persons who share a protected characteristic is disproportionately low. Therefore, an employer can take action which is proportionate, and this is means of achieving, overcoming or minimising the disadvantage identified, and enabling or encouraging persons who share the protected characteristic to participate in the activity. So for it to be proportionate, there is some evidence which is required, but that really is a low threshold. It can be local, national or specific workforce statistics, and Skills Development Scotland actually hosts a lot of statistics that would be useful if you don't have any of your own to look at what would be proportionate. Next slide, please. So this slide here is not going to come as a surprise to anybody, but what it shows is the participation in the graduate apprenticeship by male-female breakdown. And it's over the last 3-year trend. So the kind of key things to point out is where you see an asterisk, it means that for either male or female, then there's less than 5%. So what we do know is that all the engineering frameworks, your cybersecurity and your construction, as you will have guessed, are very heavily dominated by males. And then your early learning and childcare is heavily dominated by females. So nothing that will come as a surprise, but there is statistics that will kind of show how we're doing with gender balance within the graduate apprenticeship frameworks. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, I want to talk a little bit about what can be done today, put some kind of practical thoughts out there. So employers can take one-off small activity or longer term kind of concerted actions or programs. If you haven't tried any positive action before, it can be a good idea to try something small, maybe something one-off, see how it goes, and then look to see if there can be something more longer term embedded in what you do around positive action. So some examples of this could be open days, the opportunity for people to meet role models, work experience, or hands-on taster days. Also ensuring that you're linking with your local schools and DYW, college or foundation and modern apprenticeship programs. We see the publishing case studies that feature women is really powerful, and ensuring that websites and advertisements appeal to women so they feel more comfortable if it is a male-dominated environment that they're looking to apply to. Also, it's really important is to review entry requirements and processes. I understand that there will be some minimum entry requirements, but really reviewing these to see that what is in place is absolutely essential, and also the processes that you have in place, and reflecting on if there is anything that you have in place that could be a block for any underrepresented individuals being able to apply for your opportunities. Also promoting the use of women's networks, mentoring and other support available. And if you don't have that in place, then it could be something to look at, embedding and then promoting around. And utilising social media is in bold because it's free and we know it has such a massive reach. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, I'm going to talk about some real life examples, and the first that I want to talk to you is about the Arnold Clark Girls with Skills programme. Now this is for modern apprenticeships, but the idea can easily be translated into graduate apprenticeships. This is something that Arnold Clark have ran for a couple of years. And what they do is they engage with their DYW and the marketplace platform to engage with local schools to come out and talk about automotive apprenticeships. We then invite females that are interested along to a day at the GTG training centre to find all about, what would be involved in the apprenticeship. Those that are interested after that day at the GTG training centre are invited to a 1 week's work experience at a local garage. After that 1 week, if they have done well and they're still interested, then there are opportunities that are offered, and they have a little bit of a celebration event. And the last round of this, there was actually 13 females that were successful and moved on to an automotive apprenticeship with Arnold Clark. And the next slide will show the 13 girls next. That's them all there at their celebration event. And as I mentioned, these 13 girls were all successful in an automotive apprenticeship with Arnold Clark. Next slide, please. Thank you. This next one is still GTG and Arnold Clark. It isn't just about attracting females, but it was around inclusive recruitment. So I thought it was an interesting one to mention. They also connected with Glasgow City College and their ESOL course, and went in and delivered a session about automotive apprenticeships to their ESOL courses. So that's English second language courses. They then brought an interactive van that they have to campus, where it sat for a couple of days, and interested individuals from the ESOL courses were able to go on and have a play around on this interactive van. And then interested candidates signed themselves up to be invited along to 2 days at a GTG training centre. And part of these 2 days was finding out all about automotive, but there was also a math and English selection test. So Arnold Clark actually removed their usual entry requirements and replaced them with math and English selection tests to avoid the issue of individuals not having certain qualifications. And at the end of that, there was two successful individuals that moved on to an apprenticeship. And one of them, who's featured here, is Marianne, who was female, a refugee, and is now an automotive apprentice. Next slide, please. This is a programme that I myself supported with Shetland Council and Train Shetland. We called it Emmy for the Day, Dare to be Different, and we've done it for 2 years, and we've promoted this to 3rd and 4th year high school students in Shetland to have the opportunity to be an apprentice for the day. But there was a gender twist, so the females knew that if they were applying, they were going to be placed in a STEM apprenticeship for a day, and a male would be placed in a care apprenticeship for the day. We've done this for 2 years in a row, and we get really fantastic feedback from young people, and it's Shetland Council that offer the placements out, and they get a really great experience of having these young people come in and try out the industry. And as I mentioned, they have poor representation with females in their STEM sectors and males in their care, so it's a good opportunity for them to show the industry and the opportunities to the kind of alternative genders. So this is just some pictures from one of the Dare to be Different days that we ran up in Shetland. Next slide, please. And this is, we mentioned open days at the start. So there's an organisation called OGTAP. They have previously run 2 open evenings that were for women. So any woman aged 15 plus was able to come along, bring a parent or a friend. And at the open day, they had the opportunity to see female role models and speak to them. They got a tour of the Nest Call training facilities, and the flyer, which you'll see on the slide, had messages that appealed to young women. So for example, they referred to the energy sector rather than oil and gas. The outcomes of these open days where they had 55 female applicants and 38 that were suitable for the next stage. And that was up from 23 female applicants and 8 suitable for the next stage on the year before. They had 10 that were offered starts, and off the back of it, they now have videos that feature women on their website, and even just things like sourcing overalls and women's sizes, so that in future women that come onto the programs don't have that awkward moment of not having the overalls in the correct size. Next slide, please. I've mentioned case studies quite a lot through this. I'm quite happy to share my slides, so we've just included some links to case studies. If you don't have any of your own case studies and you want to have a look at some others, or even if you want to feature some case studies on your website, on this slide here, these are Heriot-Watt female STEM graduate apprenticeships. And next slide, please. This is just some national, again, female graduate apprenticeship, really inspiring stories that you can click on to and have a read. Next slide, please. I mentioned at the start that I am an equality executive for Scottish Apprenticeships. I am a team of 5, so we can help you if you do want to plan activity and reach target groups. We can offer you expert advice, link you with partners, and help you develop attractive approaches to target groups. I've included some links on these slides because we do have an equality page within Skills Development Scotland, which is on the top link there. And then I've pulled some resources that we do have from that page that might be useful. So the first one is a guide to positive action. So if you want to delve a little bit deeper into that, we also have, again, on there, we have examples, case studies, hints and tips that can be really useful for your first step if you want to start having to think about this. And we also have inclusive recruitment guides that talk about pre-recruitment, your recruitment, and also in the workplace, how you can make it more inclusive. And next slide, please. So thank you very much. I have included my email address and my team's email address if you do want to get in touch and have a chat about any support that we can offer. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Marguerite. That was excellent. I'm pleased to welcome now Sara Dodd, who's a digital strategist at Heriot-Watt. Thanks, Marguerite. Thanks, Sara.
Great, thank you, Lynn. Welcome, everyone. Great delight to be here and to hear such really excellent points from both Lesley and Marguerite. Wonderful to hear that we need to promote that strategic change at government level to really rebalance that. And as Lesley calls it, building the future better, or building back better, really strong point. And Marguerite, thank you for the excellent advice and the pointers to positive action people can take. I work with the GA team, the Graduate Apprenticeship team at Heriot-Watt, and I was going to take you through a few slides about some practical tips that you can put into place to help attract and recruit more women into your roles. So could I have the next slide, please, Lynn? These are just some actually stats. Some of these were drawn from the McKinsey report that was alluded to earlier. We probably all know this, or we hear a lot of it, but just it's really a good reminder to know that having diverse workforces is not only creates a balance across the company, but increases your productivity, increases the profitability, and generates a lot of creativity. So it's like bringing in different, it's sort of bringing in different cognition, people that think differently, that approach problems differently and think laterally. It's very much broadening exercise within an organization. Can I have the next slide, please? Again, this was really focused on what apprentices can do. And because we're talking about people that maybe have come from an industry or background that's very different to the one they're joining, you get a very different, fresh perspective from bringing on either a young apprentice or someone that's being retrained or reskilling into a new role. So lots and lots of value and benefits in doing that. And we've seen in our history of using graduate apprenticeships at Heriot-Watt, a lot of the value that that's delivering to organizations. So it's really a form of recruitment that maybe companies haven't yet embraced, but offers a viable alternative to the traditional routes. Next slide, please, Lynn. So here we've got good old stats. Stats are always a good thing to have. And this slide of women in the digital tech pipeline was actually taken from SDS report in tackling the technology gender gap. So what's interesting is that it starts early, and we have alluded to that in education, that we need to get more young women interested in STEM subjects, and in particular computing science and data science. Right now we might have 20% at Nat 5, but it drops at higher. And then when you get into the university, we're looking at 16%. In some cases it's lower. And then when you actually get into occupations, the average is about 18. Now, over the last few years, it's increased a bit. We are seeing some stats at 20 to 26% in tech teams. But it was interesting, I read a few that I'll just relate to you here. In that 26% of all computing related jobs are held by women. But then you have 74% of girls who express a desire for a STEM career, but only 9% of the female graduates studied a core STEM subject. So there's a real mismatch in terms of getting girls from that level of interest up to fulfilling that in a university or a college degree. And less than 2% of tech teams are women. The last stat that's a little bit different in there is that almost half of the tech educated women who have children go on to leave their job. And so then you have a gap in the pipeline, a leaky pipeline, where people who have the skills, the talent, have pursued the degree, gained the expertise, are leaving, and then not coming back fast enough. So next slide, please, Lynn. One of the things that companies can do, and many of you maybe are doing that, is to reach out and try to find where your source of recruits is. You know, people often have a job on their website. They may use some of the channels that they work with in terms of the business and the business environment or the sector that they're in. But I often have found that these jobs are not advertised within different and sometimes smaller communities where women might be, and they might be looking for jobs like that. I came from CodeClan, which offers a boot camp style software development and a data analysis course for career transition training. And we increased the number of women to about 27% on the courses there, because it had very strong training and there were a lot of employers engaged, and so the risk was diminished. But it was a fantastic place for companies who were wanting to recruit to come and meet young women that were very keen to develop careers in that area. CodeBar is another interesting organization. It's a charity, and it helps women, really focuses on women from ethnic minorities or from underrepresented groups, gives free online training, and then has workshops, they used to be physical, where women could have a mentor or a volunteer to help them take them through that program in Java, or if they were doing a JavaScript or even HTML and CSS. So it was supporting people in their early steps to getting more digital skills. Tech Moms does much the same for women wanting to return to work, and that's a national program. Women Who Code is very good too, because it brings women together that are in the tech industry and offers support and advice for advancing their careers. So keeping them in the pipeline with the skills to manage and lead digital teams. Girl Geek Scotland, Sam's on our panel today, and I'm sure she can tell you more about that. But again, a very influential and positive dynamic force for helping girls to feel comfortable and confident in wanting to engage in tech skills and where they can take that and how to do it. But there's a lot of, I put notes there too, there's lots of different ways that you can approach recruiting people, from looking at some of these organizations to other things like the graduate apprenticeship scheme. Could I have the next slide, please? So I've done a couple of screen captures you'll see throughout this from some LinkedIn report on a gender insights, and there are a lot of things that we need to think about. One of this was women find jobs differently and how they look at jobs. Now, LinkedIn is going to focus on the ones that are posted on their website, but I think a lot of it is relevant across employer websites too. And one of the things women, without being stereotyped, I think a lot of people do that, is looking at what the employee value proposition is. So what are the What's the value of joining that company? What's the benefits that you're going to realize? What's the learning that you will capitalize on? And it's really a strong, compelling factor to attract a woman to a job. We know that having a strong brand presence and showing commitment to diversity and reflecting that throughout your website will create a positive influence on how people see your site and see taking up a career with them. I want to look at the next slide, please, and I think this is a really good, just a good practice. Now, this is taken from Wood Mackenzie, who does a lot of research in the oil and gas industry and energy and environment right the way through. What I think was great was the way they used language here to describe what the ethos of the company was and how much they valued their employees. And we have here, you're focusing on it's a very positive message. The values are clearly stated. If you went onto this site and looked, the values are all listed. There's a sense of welcoming diversity and bringing belonging into that. And do you know, although we might think of these as sort of the soft touch, these are very much core elements that women in particular will look for before they take the step further to applying. Can we have the next slide, please? So some of that we've alluded to before, and Marguerite alluded to the idea of language in job descriptions and in company descriptions, and it really does matter. And a lot of study has been done on this, and I know that there were major companies have undertaken that unconscious bias approach to look at the language they were using and to see why they weren't, or if they could attract more women by changing that. Often, very much, it's the same job, it's just using different language to describe it. And what they found, or well, particularly in LinkedIn, which has done global surveys, is that if you can take away all the lists of skills and all the acronyms and all the technical things, and you can think more about what the person will be doing, what the performance objectives would be, and what they'd be looking for in terms of a normal day-to-day work pattern. A lot of companies that will also advertise what the KPIs are and what you'd be expected to achieve are very successful in attracting more women to those roles. A lot of things you can also do by avoiding phrases like what's their recent, you need to explain your recent experience, or getting people to talk about the value of the skills that they've gained out with the workplace as valuable and recognizable, and that they would be scored well in an application. Can you look at the next slide, please? So interestingly, people are, if we just in the last slide talked about how women often look to get 100% of the skills or close enough before they will apply. The same thing has to be reversed for the people making the selection. And part of that is looking differently at the people that are applying. So looking at the skills that people have and not the schools that they went to can be a critical factor. So you're not putting bias into that judgment. Again, performance, not pedigree, and results, not requirements. So we're looking at the capabilities of the person and the competencies over credentials and certificates. Now, sometimes those certificates can be valid. You may not need someone that has a recognized certificate in order to do the job, but overall, the expectation is, can they do the job? And it's better to look at it in that direction and to think about that without wrapping it up into an old wrapper. Take the wrapper off and look at it afresh and think about what you need in that workforce. There's other ways of doing it. Anonymized hiring, you can actually do things where you strip names out, you strip age out, you strip, so your HR person is doing that. So you're just looking at skills and experience based comparable table as you go forward. Look at the next slide. Now, again, this was taken from this Gender Insights report, and it might be a bit difficult to read, but there's some really good tips here on how you can approach the interview and how you can make that less biased and how you can allow or enable the person being interviewed to shine and to show what they can do, and then you can think about how that will impact on your organization. Some of the things you need to think about there about leveling the playing field before you start. You need to tell candidates, be very clear on the process, give people the advantage of knowing what the format's going to be, how many stages of the interview and what they'll have to do, and when they'll be expected to hear back. You can tell them how formal it's going to be, if it's a face-to-face or if it's online. You know, enable someone to dress appropriate and to feel comfortable. Back in the real world, you can invite people to come into an informal visit or to see the premises or to meet people so they have a feel for the organization. And lastly, you can give people a call to check everybody knows what the format's going to be, or if it's face-to-face, where they're going to go and how they're going to get there. Having a panel that is instead of a one-to-one very much gives a broader view and enables people not to just stick to one point of view, but to be questioned and queried by the other people on the panel. Ideally having a balanced gender panel, a bit difficult when there's 3, but if you had 4, that's going to make it feel more comfortable for a female applicant. Remember, you're defining the job and not the purpose. You're not trying to find the perfect person that meets all your skills. You're looking at what that person can offer you. So lots of good tips on this. I liked one here that was saying, you know, be a juror, not a judge. Hear all the evidence before you decide. So making snap decisions on responses to one question, you know, put that to the side. Wait till you get to the end and explore and try and probe what that person can offer from a different background or from different experience. And there was one other comment I thought was very good, is how do you script the interview? Can you conduct a work history and then apply that same metrics to everybody that comes in front of you, so that you're doing a scoring that is universal across all your candidates, and you can balance that. So again, you're not looking or giving scoring points for any one particular requirement, but looking at the person as a whole. So that's really me. I had just some quotes that I felt were valuable in people that have used the apprenticeship program as a way of bringing people on board. It has these type of quotes are what we hear from all our employers. It's not just 1 or 2. It really has a valuable contribution to opening up your talent pipeline from the very beginning, or from upskilling people within it. And I love the last one, which again was on Wood Mackenzie, which is that idea of investing in creative thinkers and innovators. I think that's really true, and I think women can respond to that. It's not about having technical skills or deep knowledge in a specific technical topic. It's about being creative. It's about being able to innovate and to problem solve in a rich environment of different thinking. Here's just one last screenshot of the Gender Insights report that you can go and find on LinkedIn. And there are lots of other good publications. Marguerite alluded to one that Skills Development Scotland has. I know EQUATE has some really good advice on their website. And there's also a tech talent portal, which again it's a tech talent charter actually, but you can find some very good advice and support on how to recruit women and people from diverse and different backgrounds into your organization. So that's it for me. Thank you very much. And I think it's over to Lynne and the panel.
Thanks, Sarah. That was really good. Thank you. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen now. And if I could ask the panelists to turn their cameras on, if that's okay. So we've a couple of comments through, but what I'm going to do is ask a question of our other panelists, Sam and Emily, but I'll start with Sam. Based on your background of working in what remains to be a male-dominated industry, coupled with your role at Girl Geek Scotland, what is your experience of how roles and purposes within the workplace impact the gender gap, and do these need to be reconsidered by employers?
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm a software engineer and a data scientist, and I've spent over 20 years working in that area. And the way that women approach wanting to solve a problem and wanting to get a role to solve that problem seems to be very different, and it seems to have quite a big impact. So one of the things that I've definitely observed in terms of women being more interested in applying for a role or going for a role internally, because I think that's something also to think a lot about, is people that you have perhaps even in other types of roles within your organisation might want to move into one of the more technical ones because they've become aware of the different types of roles, because that's something you don't always get that exposure to. Once you're in there, you might want to reskill. So understanding the purpose behind doing it, and it's been touched on by all our great speakers. I really enjoyed the talks, thank you. Is think about how you can explain the purpose behind what you're doing. Seeing a role advertised as software engineer, actually, given I am one of those, but it feels quite dry in some ways. Data scientist, that's the area I focus on now. So think about maybe how you can turn those things on their head a little bit. Instead of just having the job title, think about the purpose. So as an example, some of the projects that I've worked on have been incredibly diverse. One of them was around helping manage patients who were going through chemotherapy. Now, I used my data science skills for that. I used my software engineering skills, but I also used an awful lot of my skills around my people skills and my ability to talk, understand, and relate to the people that were doing that. And a very challenging project because of the nature of it. It definitely is something that I've observed, that women are really interested in that purpose. And when I talk to people about the project, I could see people's faces like kind of light up. They weren't software engineers, they weren't data scientists, but they suddenly saw a real purpose to it. Seeing something like that in comparison with a list of here are the skills that you've got to do in terms of maybe languages you have to be able to learn, that makes a big difference. And I definitely think we can apply that to different areas of STEM. Think about those projects and the purpose and what's the outcome, and you get a different sort of person thinking about it.
That's interesting. And it's a key point that everyone's hitting on, so it is something that employers really do need to consider, isn't it? It probably is a good link into the question I want to ask Emily. Emily, we had a chat about a recent interview experience, and we won't mention the company name apart from it's a sizable organisation, so they probably should know better. But your interview experience and follow-up left a lot to be desired. Can you maybe tell us what happened and how the employer did not consider female applicants during the process and where they potentially demonstrated a gender bias?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm in my final year, so I'm doing a lot of applications at the moment, and I was invited to an assessment centre day not so long ago. And it was an interesting experience because the dynamic of the groups that they put me in to do group exercises was, I think I was with 5 men, and I was the single female. Obviously in itself that the dynamic was chosen in the first place, but what was even more interesting was the feedback that I received from these group exercises. And I think touching on Sara's point, Marguerite's point, that language matters, because in the feedback they said that I was controlling in the situation, and it was an interesting word to use, given the dynamic that I was put in. And I will also mention that the assessors were men as well on the call, and we didn't get to. And I felt like it was very impersonal, and it was an interesting experience because it led me to do more research and to look at the Hampton-Alexander report. And that's when I realised that a third of the FTSE 100 companies haven't achieved 33% of women on the boards. Mm-hmm. And they were given 5 years to do this. And the particular company that I interviewed with, they are part of this. And it was an interesting thing to realise that I'd had quite a negative experience, and then to see that in the report, it made sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you would have hoped they would have known better, with consideration to that fact. So
yes, apologies if my connection was
it's
bad
okay.
then.
We got the gist of what you were saying. So
Okay.
that's okay. Thanks so much, Emily. Referring to the Hampton-Alexander Review, can I just ask all of the panel what they think the real dangers now that the statutory enforcement measures on the collection of gender pay gap data was suspended in 2020, and especially as there is no current government-led initiative or regulatory body to enforce the collection of this data. So I don't know who maybe wants to answer that.
I'm happy to answer that, Lynn. I think,
Thanks.
as I highlighted in my presentation, what gets measured gets managed. And I think what we've seen is, particularly in the areas of making progress on gender and wider equality and diversity issues, there is a lack of measurement. And I think it is particularly concerning that we've seen employers not recording this data through this period of time. And I think the number who have submitted in this next recording period is also even lower. So there's around 6,000 companies should be reporting that data. Less than half did so in last year, and I believe it's only about 400 that have submitted data so far. So I do believe we have reached a point that if we are serious about change and societal change and cultural change, then that does require us to put some measures in place. And, you know, for women in STEM, we always talk about, and employers and businesses talk about, you know, show me the data to back this up. We're awash with data, but what we're not using it is to inform and construct policy differently. And I believe the time has come that we really must now consider doing that. And I think that starts with all of us. So we can all look at our own data. We can look at our own policies, and we've seen here, you can look at the language and the way that we set out our job applications and how we include people and how we treat people through our recruitment process. So it's the conversation that happens as a result of the data, not the data itself and the change that we want to see happen.
Yeah, it goes back to you wanting to pull that intersectional report exposing who's benefiting and how the youth guarantee, etc., has been utilised and whatnot as well. So it's really imperative that we use the data that we have and build on it, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it would be good to see actually right now, where is the appetite to do something differently? And I think there is opportunity. So I guess we're just advocating for organisations and government, you know, to seize that opportunity now.
We have quite a few comments coming through, and what I'd probably like to do is open up. If anyone wants to ask a question, please just turn your mic on and ask. You don't have to tweet, or not tweet, you don't have to comment in the comment section. You're more than welcome to ask the question live. We have a comment from Sharan Verdi saying that Heriot-Watt are collecting data and haven't stopped collecting data at any point, so that's really good to hear. Sharan also mentioned a point earlier on in the presentation, just after your presentation, Lesley, regarding the kind of socio-economic impact of COVID and how that's going to reverberate and impact on what's going on in terms of the prosperity to be risk adverse. And she says, sorry, I don't know if Sharan's a female or male, I do apologise, but I think that's set to get worse, which is a major barrier to bold and ambitious actions. So, I mean, COVID is going to really stop things in its tracks. And I think Emily could allude to that as well, because your Women in STEM group, all the good progress that had been made and the setup of that was kind of stopped in its tracks because of COVID. So, yeah, I mean, is that changing now? Because are you building that back up because of the online presence? Do you think that's starting to change now?
Yeah, I think we've managed to maintain the organisation and stay afloat essentially and keep everyone connected. But it's been a challenge, and definitely we've seen a drop in engagement. And I think part of this is with working from home and everyone feeling like everything takes longer and they have less time to feel social. And if they want to join a social, it still means sitting at the laptop, and it's a difficult one to balance. But I really hope that when we get back in person that everyone will come along to events, because that personal touch and that personal connection, I think, is really important.
Yeah, it can go a long way.
Mm-hmm.
So to help set expectations with the vast experience of everyone on the panel and working with employers who are not meeting gender targets, how long should an employer realistically allow for to devise and implement a strategy to create a more gender balanced workforce? I mean, it's not going to be an overnight thing. So can someone maybe help set that expectation for employers that are listening to this webinar as to how long they should expect for such to take place and to be properly implemented?
Lynn, I don't think there's an exact answer to that question. I think it depends greatly on the employer. So there'll be some employers that are huge employers and have resource there waiting that they can actually devise a strategy and a plan. And, you know, especially if they're in a sector like construction or engineering that is so heavily dominated by males that you know instantly that there's work to be done. Where there might be some organisations that are really small, they don't do a lot of recruitment. Maybe the need isn't quite as great. So I think that it's about kind of reflecting on your own organisation, the size and scope of that organisation, and the impact that you would have, and to make some changes. And what I mentioned as well when I did my talk is that to devise a strategy, it might actually be easier to think of small steps first. So think about small achievable things that you can do, whether it's looking at the images and the wording, your interview panels, as Emily mentioned. You know, these things can be addressed really quickly and really easily, whereas the kind of longer term solutions to be embedded might be something that from these small steps get build up and build up and build up. So I think it's a difficult one to answer, but I think it's about reflecting on what you're doing right now and what your scope is and how quickly you can make some small changes and take them forward.
So it's more of a cultural thing potentially than within an organisation. If they don't have a gender balanced workforce, they should be looking at the overall picture in terms of how they're approaching lots of things. Does that, in fact, that's another question I would like to ask in terms of females in the workplace. Does the gender imbalance, well, females that are successful in terms of what they're doing in their career, are they more prone to feeling imposter syndrome if there is a gender imbalance in the workplace?
I think it's really important that we understand, just building on what Marguerite had mentioned there, it's about a journey, and it's understanding all the different elements that contribute to that. And that's why I think it is about starting with each organisation, looking at where it is on that journey. And that comes back to understand your data at the start, understand what your local population and where are you trying to recruit from looks like, you know, understanding the fullest sense of what's going to make your business successful and diverse in the long term, and setting some objectives around that. And some of those don't cost a lot of money, as we've just described. You know, they're very cost effective in terms of making a change without actually necessarily spending a lot of money. But it does require effort, it requires commitment, and it really requires leadership. And in terms of imposter syndrome, I think women at any level of the organisation, you know, you can read all the books that we all suffer from that. We all have our moments where we question why we're there. But I've read Michelle Obama's book recently, Becoming, and she talked very much about, you know, am I good enough? Am I ready to be here? Well, of course we are. We just need to stop asking ourselves that, you know, that negative question. And we need to focus on the strengths and the great skills, the diverse skills that we actually bring to an organisation. It's about having that pool of diversity of thinking and attitude and attributes, and those are the qualities that women, you know, can bring. Not by accident in the Hampton-Alexander report do they talk about reaching that 30% threshold. You know, it's that power of three. You know, you have to get a collection of movement forward to have enough women in the organisation that actually starts to make the difference to the way the organisation works. Tokenism is never a good thing, and It is about ensuring that we start that journey with the right intent, with the right objectives, and work towards that. And as I said, you measure your progress, you see what's working, and you try and understand when things aren't working, why that is.
Yeah, I like this. What gets measured gets managed, Lesley. I think that's really key.
Lynne, hi. Heba's got her hand up.
Oh, excellent. Right, David, if you can help with the questions, that would be really good. Sure. So Heba, sorry, please, what's your question? Hello, how are you?
My name is Heba and I'm working in the data science graduate apprenticeship at Heriot-Watt. I already see some names and people who I know. Emily is, I am really fascinated with the work that she has done with the Watt women. They have done a lot, and I have said that before. Only due to the COVID, this have stopped them a little bit, but I'm sure that they will come back stronger because they have done amazing events so far. I also see Tina and I see Lynne and I see Sara. So sorry if I don't know the others, but it's really good to know you and to see you. And I really enjoyed the talks a lot. I have seen through the 2 years that I have worked in the graduate apprenticeship in the data science that the number of women applying is increasing, which is really interesting for us. And I also see their performance and how they are doing. So I'm very proud to that. I don't have any questions, unfortunately, but I just wanted to say that I'm really proud to be in this session and I really enjoyed the talks. And thank you all for everything that you're doing. And yeah. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Heba. That's really kind of you to say. And of course, you're flying the flag for a female in STEM. So that's really good as well. So I don't know if anyone else has got any other questions or comments, David. Do you have any other notes that I've not been able to keep up with that have come through the...
No, I think we're kind of up to date, yeah.
Okay, so I mean, we definitely want to have a call to action moving forward. So there are plans for all the ladies on this call to work together moving forward. In a joined up approach, we're all working on kind of separate initiatives, but we hope to work together moving forward, because I do think, I think we're all in agreement it's going to take a collective effort where educational institutes like Heriot-Watt, industry and industry bodies like EQUATE and Guildgeek, etc., and other sector councils and so forth need to work together to tackle this issue. So yeah, that's something to keep an eye out. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining today's webinar. If there's no other questions, should I maybe hang fire for a couple of minutes, or?
I think we're just about on time anyway, Lynne. So I think.
Yeah, I'm just trying to read the comments.
I mean, I think just for, can I just chip in just 2 seconds?
Of course you can.
Goes away. Yeah, so thanks everybody that's taken part today. Really great, and great to see some nice feedback coming through in the chat. Just a small request from me. So today, the session today forms part of a kind of whole day of activities we've got dedicated to like women in graduate apprenticeships. So if for the kind of particularly our external guests on the call today, we will be sort of sharing case studies, and I can go back to what Marguerite was talking about before. Case studies are a great way to sort of show these. So we'll be showing some sort of short videos from some of our women GAs, particularly in the sort of STEM areas, and we'll also be sharing some other case studies on LinkedIn and Twitter through the day. So you can please pop over to our LinkedIn page and our Twitter account, and so keep up to date with some of the kind of quite inspirational stories that we're sharing from our women in graduate apprenticeship. So that's what I'd just like to say. Quick plug for our other activities today. But yeah, we've got a whole day dedicated to sharing these type of stories. So it's great to kick off the day with this event. And thanks again.
Thanks, David. I was going to say the exact same thing. Please follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter. Keep up to date with what we're doing, especially today, but also in the coming weeks and months. So we will post information on events and so forth that we will be hosting. So do keep an eye out on what we're doing, please. That would be helpful. So thanks everyone for joining us today, and thanks to our panelists and speakers. It's been a great session. So yeah. Thank you, and we'll be sending around the webinar with the PDF version of the slide deck as well, so you'll have everyone's contact information on there and our details as well. So if there's any questions, queries, or you want to help as part of one of the initiatives, please get in touch. Have a lovely weekend, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lynne, thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good weekend.